All right, today we are diving into something really fascinating, how a country's economic crisis can actually lead to global conflict. We're going to look at Japan back in the 1920s and 30s and see how their financial troubles did way more than just cause a recession. They literally put the nation on a direct path to war.
I mean, think about it. Can an economic crisis actually start a war? It's a huge question, right? Well, for Japan between the wars, the answer is, well, it's complicated, and it's absolutely compelling. We're going to trace that path step by step, from financial desperation right to the battlefield.
Okay, let's jump right in. To really get what happened, we've got to rewind the clock to the period just after World War I. Now, if you looked at Japan from the outside, you'd see this rising industrial power. Everything looked great. But underneath the surface, its whole economy was walking this incredibly dangerous tightrope. And this right here, this is the heart of the problem. Japan had basically zero essential natural resources. We're talking no oil, no iron, no coal to speak of. They had to import all of it. So how do you pay for that? Well, they had to rely almost completely on exporting luxury goods, and the crown jewel of their export economy was raw silk. You can already see how fragile this whole setup is, right?
And this quote from historian Mark Metzler, wow, it just nails it. For the leaders in Japan, the big fear wasn't a military invasion from another country. No, the real existential threat, the thing that kept them up at night, was economic. It was the possibility that Western powers could just turn off the tap, cut off their resources with an embargo. And that fear, the fear of being economically strangled, became way more powerful than the fear of war. It's going to shape every single decision they make from here on out.
So you've got this nation walking an economic tightrope. What happens when it gets slammed by a global hurricane? Because that's basically what the 1929 stock market crash was. The Great Depression that followed wasn't just some crisis for the West. For Japan, it was an absolute catastrophe. And just like that, boom! The bottom completely fell out of their most important market. You see, all that silk that was paying for Japan's oil and iron, it was a luxury. And in a world deep in depression, nobody could afford luxuries. It's like their entire economic engine just sputtered and died, almost overnight.
And just look at the speed of this collapse. I mean, it's staggering. This wasn't some slow, gradual decline. No way. In just 2 short years, the value of Japan's silk exports completely plummeted. This wasn't a leak, it was a gusher, a total hemorrhage of the foreign cash they desperately needed just to function.
And you know, a disaster like that doesn't just stay on the balance sheets. It hits the streets hard. This economic implosion immediately turned into a massive social crisis at home. You had mass unemployment sweeping the cities. Out in the countryside, where most of that silk came from, poverty became extreme. And all that suffering, well, it fueled social unrest and started pushing a lot of people toward more radical, more nationalistic political ideas.
This is where historian Andrew Gordon makes a really crucial point. The crisis did more than just empty people's pockets. It completely shattered their faith in the whole global system of trade and cooperation. To a lot of people in Japan, the idea of liberal, open markets suddenly looked like a total, dangerous failure. And in its place, a new, much more aggressive idea started to take hold: expansion, not for glory, but as a form of economic survival. So what do? Well, all of this desperation led directly to a pretty radical new plan. The thinking was, if Japan can't trust the global economy, then fine. It'll just build its own economy, one it could control by force if it had to.
Now, there's a specific word for this goal. It's autarky. And all it means is total economic self-sufficiency. The vision was to create this massive economic bloc right there in East Asia. They even had a name for it, the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. And at the center of it all would be Japan, controlling every resource, every market it could ever need.
And look, this wasn't just some vague daydream idea. It was a concrete playbook. Step 1, invade your neighbors, like Manchuria, to seize the land and the resources you don't have. Step 2, force those new colonies to become captive markets for all your Japanese goods. Step 3, by doing all that, you break your country's economic dependence on the West. You could even solve unemployment back home by sending your people out as colonists. It was a whole strategy.
And historian Louise Young really highlights the crucial shift in thinking here. Suddenly, military expansion wasn't just about national pride or glory anymore. It was being reframed as a domestic economic policy. It was pitched as a direct solution to the poverty and the unemployment that people were seeing every day back home. War was literally being sold as a fix for the economy.
Okay, but this whole aggressive solution had one massive problem. The resources and the markets that Japan so desperately wanted, they were already part of a global system. And other big players, especially China and the Western nations, weren't just going to stand by and let it happen. This put Japan on a direct collision course with, well, pretty much the rest of the world.
And you can see the escalation so clearly. It starts with the invasion of Manchuria to grab those resources. That move immediately threatened the commercial interests of the US and the big European powers in China. Then, as Japan keeps pushing, tensions over trade routes and raw materials just skyrocket. So feeling cornered and condemned by everyone, what does Japan do? It doubles down. It walks out of the League of Nations, isolating itself even more.
And as historian Ikira Airi points out, the whole dynamic had completely changed. Diplomacy pushed right off the table. The main conflict now was economic. It was a zero-sum game for resources and for markets. And in that kind of environment, compromise becomes politically impossible, not just for Japan, but for all sides. And that left military conflict as one of the only options left.
But here's where it gets even more interesting. Because while that economic story is incredibly powerful, it's not the only story. Historians are still debating just how central these pressures really were compared to other things, like Japan's growing militarism and its unique political ideology.
So you've basically got two main schools of thought here. On one side, you have what you could call the economic strangulation argument. These historians argue that this economic desperation was the primary driver, that Japan's expansion was almost a logical, if tragic, response to a very real threat. But then, on the other side, you have historians who argue that the crisis just made expansion an attractive option. It opened the door, but it was Japan's specific political culture and its rising militarist ideology that actually shoved the nation through that door and onto the path to war.
But here's the thing. No matter which interpretation you lean towards, the key takeaway is crystal clear. This deep-seated feeling of economic insecurity at home completely shattered Japan's confidence in global cooperation. It pushed them to abandon diplomacy and embrace a new belief that only aggressive military expansion could guarantee the nation's survival.
And that really leaves us with a question that is just as relevant today as it was back then. When a nation feels its economic survival is truly on the line, what choices does it have? Will it choose cooperation or will it choose confrontation? The story of Japan, well, it's a sobering reminder of what can happen.